Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Elisa Maria Designs. It's Elisa Maria, of course, and it is Thursday, September the 11th, and I sat down with this painting a few hours ago. It's been a very emotional day today, as it is for a lot of you, but I think that the day has been compounded. A very difficult day has been compounded by other losses that we've had over the past few days. And so I sat down with my diamond painting out of it and just trying to get set up here is a little difficult. But by the time I was done diamond painting and by the time I was, listening to the thoughts that were happening in my head, and I put my pen down a few times and cried again, and then I took my journal out and I started to capture these thoughts, and I thought to myself, the best thing that I can do to honor those who have gone before us, whether it's from 9/11, whether it's family, your friends, is to live. Don't stop. Don't stop pushing forward. Don't stop through the pain and the tears and the anguish and the disbelief and the anger and the confusion. Don't stop living your life. Don't stop creating the world that you want to live in. Do something with your hands. Create. Create. Learn something new every day. Go to bed exhausted from squeezing every second you have been blessed with to create the world that you want to live in. And then I went downstairs and I got something to eat. And then I sat down and I finally turned my phone on because it's been traumatic to even look at for me to look at the phone and go into my YouTube channel. It's like you can't go into your phone with blinders. I can't check my email with blinders on or messages with blinders on. And and I had so many messages from you guys, like how much you're enjoying the reading. And I said, I had something else planned for this video, but I am going to do my reading because it brings you guys joy and you're loving it. And I tried a few angles here. I really wanted to zoom in on the beautiful fairy dust diamonds that you'll see. And I just want to create something beautiful. I don't want to cry anymore. I will. We all do. Grief it's always with us, isn't it? And we got to sit with it, and then we have to live our lives. So here we go. Chapter 3, The Bad Seed. Mrs. Breedlove lived with her brother on the floor above the pen marks. There had been a great event in her life, one which she had not been able to forget. In the middle 20s, her husband, not knowing what else to do with her, acceded to her wish that she go to Vienna and be psychoanalyzed by Professor Freud. The story of her analysis was one which she never tired of telling, one whose possibilities she never succeeded in exhausting. It seemed that after her intense initial session with the professor, he had said frankly that her particular temperament was beyond his skill, and had suggested that she go to London and seek the aid of his pupil, Dr. Aaron Kettlebaum. This she had done. It was a fortunate suggestion, she often said. Not that I'm minimizing Dr. Ford's professional standing in any manner, shape, or form, for I still consider him, in spite of his peculiarities, the great genius of our time. But Dr. Kettlebaum was more simpatico, if you know what I mean. Freud was so committed to 19th century materialism that it warped his viewpoint, it seemed to me. Then, too, he loathed American women, particularly the ones who were able to stand on their own feet and slug it out on equal terms with men. Now, Dr. Kettlebaum believed in the power of the individual soul, and he considered sex of only trivial interest. His mind was mystic rather than literal, the same as my own. He did much for me, and when he died several years ago, I cabled flowers and cried for a week. She had returned to her husband 3 years later and at once began proceedings for divorce, an action which he made no effort to oppose. When she was free again, she decided it was her duty to make a home for her brother Emery, and she did so. She took pleasure in the analysis of his character, analysis that he endured mostly in silence. Of late, she had come to the conclusion, through a series of her own deductions, that Emery was, as she termed it, a larvated homosexual. I'll tell you this, Monica, she is something else. And once during the preceding spring, at one of her big dinner parties, she seized on the new theme and discussed it so freely that only unembarrassed person at the table was herself. "What does larvated mean?" asked Emery. "That's one I haven't heard so far." "It means covered, as with a mask," said Mrs. Breelove. "It means concealed." "It means something that hasn't come to the surface as yet," said Kenneth Penmark. "You can say that again," said Emery, laughing weakly. He was a plump, ruddy man, a few years younger than his sister. His hair had receded far back on his pink, domed forehead. His belly was small and hard. It had a taut, rounded quality, as though designed by nature as a background for the massive watch chain and emblem. Frank Billings, whom Monica always referred to as Emery's canasta friend, said, "Well, where do you get that idea, Monica? What makes you think that?" "My opinion," said Mrs. Breelove, "is based on the evidence of pure association, and that's the best evidence of all." She sipped her wine, puffed her lips thoughtfully, and went on in an earnest voice. "To begin with, Emery's 52 years old, and he's never married. I doubt if he's ever had a serious love affair." Then, seeing that she was about to be interrupted by Reginald Tasker, one of Emery's true murder mystery friends, she raised her hand and said, "Please, please," in a placating voice, and then went on quickly. "Now let's look at things objectively. What are Emery's deepest interests in life? What are the things that occupy his psyche? They are fishing, murder mysteries that involve the dismemberment of faithful housewives, canasta, baseball games, and singing in male quartets." She paused and then said, "And how does Emery spend his Sundays?" "He spends them on the boat with other men, fishing." "And are there ladies present on such occasions?" "I can answer that question at once. There are not." "You're damn right there aren't," said Emery. Mrs. Breedlove looked about her, and then, realizing for the first time the effect she created amongst her guests, she tossed her head and said in a surprised voice, "I don't see why the idea shocks you so. A thing so commonplace as that. Actually, homosexuality is triter than incest." Dr. Kettlebaum considered it was all a matter of personal preference. But it would be a mistake to think of this obsessed, garrulous old woman as a fool in most matters. She had taken the lump settlement that her husband had so cheerfully given her and invested it in real estate, following a system based both on sexual symbolism and the unalterable fact that if the town continued to grow as everyone predicted, it had to go in the direction of her holdings. She had been successful from the first. She had written a successful cookbook. She was responsible for the city's psychiatric clinic. She was thought of as the tireless civic worker, the logical, efficient chairman of the charitable drive for funds. On the day of the school picnic, Mrs. Breedlove telephoned Christine and asked her to lunch. One of Emery's fishing friends had sent him a beautiful 7-pound redfish. Emery himself had just called to say that since it was Saturday, he was closing the plant at noon and would be home for lunch. He asked her to fix redfish gelpy, which she hadn't done in a long time, and said that she would. Emery is inviting his friend, Reggie Tasker, that true crime writer you and Kenneth met last spring in our apartment, and he wants you to help entertain him. Now, why don't you come up early, say around noon, and I'll show you how to fix the redfish. It's in the sauce, mostly. Later, Mrs. Breedlove decided to serve lunch not in her gloomy, paneled dining room, but in the little alcove off her living room where she kept her ferns and African violets. And when her brother and his guests arrived, the table was set there and ready. The men were talking about a recent murder, one which was being featured in the local papers. Reginald Tasker, it appeared, was going to do it for one of his murder magazines, and was now gathering his preliminary facts. Mrs. Breedlove, hearing fragments of the talk, laughed, tossed her head, and said, "We're off to the races again." The case concerned a middle-aged hospital nurse, a Mrs. Dennison, who had been indicted for the murder on May 1st of her heavily insured 2-year-old niece, Shirley. It was then the town remembered that another niece, a sister of the 1952 victim, had died in 1950 in the same manner, when she had been 2 years old as well. Nurse Dennison, a woman dedicated to the benefits of insurance, had collected $5,000 on the death of the first child. The second niece she had insured for $6,000. Mrs. Breedlove came into the living room to welcome her visitor. Christine followed immediately and put a pitcher of martinis on the coffee table. A moment later, they went to the alcove for a final checkup of the luncheon table, and Reggie went on quickly to say that Nurse Dennison's husband, conventionally true to the family tradition of nausea, burning throat, and convulsions, had passed on in the autumn of 1951, with, of course, the conventional policies on his life. Christine laughed a little, put her hands over her ears, and said so softly the men could not hear her that she did not like to listen to such stories. Anything concerning crime, particularly murder, depressed her and made her anxious. She had seen the accounts of the Dennison case, but she could not bring herself to read them. She had merely turned the page and had gone on to something more cheerful. "You have a little psychic block there," said Mrs. Breedlove in an intense, pleased whisper. "Now, if you'll associate to the situation, maybe we can get to the roots of your anxiety." She straightened her centerpiece, and when Christine did not answer at once, she went on earnestly. "Tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. Tell me, no matter how silly it seems to you." Reginald Tasker went on to say that in the forenoon of May 1st of that year, Nurse Dennison had visited her sister-in-law's family. She got there in time for lunch. At once, she picked up her niece Shirley and began playing with the child. She had meant to bring Shirley a present, she said, but had forgotten, a thing which distressed her so greatly that she went to the country store nearby and bought candy and soda pop for the family. "Nothing comes into my mind," said Christine. "It's entirely blank." "Actually, Nurse Dennison had brought her niece a present," said Reginald Tasker. "It was the 10 cents worth of arsenic she brought on her way to her sister-in-law's home. In a way, it was more a present for herself than for her niece, since she stood to benefit so greatly if she succeeded in administering it." "But what's on your mind at this moment?" insisted Mrs. Breedlove. They returned to the kitchen, and as Mrs. Breedlove agitated the salad in her big wooden bowl, Christine said presently, "I was thinking how much the Fern sisters are impressed by my father's reputation. Miss Burgess thinks I look very much like him, although she never saw him in person, and is familiar only with his photographs." Mrs. Breedlove said in an uncertain voice, "That's an unusual association, I must say. I don't understand it so far." She narrowed her eyes, pursed her lips, and listened absently to the conversation in the living room. According to Reggie Tasker's notes, Nurse Dennison returned with her treat and immediately prepared a drink of orange pop for her niece, Shirley. For the next hour or so, she observed the child's convulsions with a most flattering concern. Later on, perhaps because the child's stamina seemed about to triumph over her aunt's intention, Nurse Dennison said that, in her opinion, what little Shirley needed at this point in her illness was another sip or two of orange pop. It was sure to settle her stomach and return her to her customary bouncing health. She tendered the cup, and Shirley, a sweet, obedient child, drank at her aunt's bidding. "Now, what's your second association?" insisted Mrs. Breedlove. "Maybe your second association will be clearer." "It's even sillier," said Christine. For a moment, she turned her past over in her mind. Then impulsively she said, "I've always had a feeling I was an adopted child, that the Bravos weren't my real parents. I asked my mother about it once. It was in Chicago, the year I finished high school, but she kept saying, 'Who have you been talking to? Who's putting such ideas in your head?' The thing upset her so much that I never mentioned it again." "Oh, you poor innocent darling," said Monica. "Don't you know that the changeling fantasy is one of the commonest of childhood? I once believed I was a foundling with royal blood. I think it was. I don't know how I managed to get on my parents' doorstep, but I had it worked out well enough when I was 5 years old. The myths and folklore of all people simply teem with such fantasies." Her laughter died suddenly. In the silence, Reginald Tasker's voice came through once more. After the child had accepted her second dose of arsenic, and it was plain she could not rally again, Nurse Dennison announced that she must hurry back to town in order to take care of a matter of her own. This errand, as it turned out, was a trip to the agent from whom she bought the smaller of the two policies she carried on the life of her niece. She failed to pay the current premium, and this particular day was the last day of her grace. She paid the premium in time and ate her supper in the knowledge that a good piece of business had been accomplished that day. She was certain the child could not last until midnight, and in this she was correct, for the little girl died about 8, making both policies operative. Mrs. Breedlove, who had been listening, nodding her head from time to time, said that, in her opinion, Reginald Tasker wasn't at all bad in his specialty. It was true that she ranked him miles below an inspired psychiatrist like Dr. Wortham. She did not even consider, turn the page, she did not even consider him on par with men like Bolitho or Roughhead, but there was a quality of compassionate irony in his best work that distinguished him and made him stand out in his field. Then, their preparations for lunch completed, Mrs. Breedlove and Christine joined the men in the living room. They each took a cocktail, and Monica, her competent, ankles crossed firmly, said, "Can't you two find something else to talk about?" "When she says something else, she means sex," said Emery. He turned to Christine as though seeking support, but she only smiled and lowered her eyes, her thoughts turning once more to the past. There were unfocused, shapeless things which had troubled her childhood. Even when she had been happiest, there was the half memory of some dreadful event she had never understood, even at the time of its occurrence. But these things were so formless and far away that they existed in her mind less as certainty than as a feeling of unreasoning dread. She sighed, pressed back her hair, and thought, "I think I once lived on a farm somewhere, and that I had brothers and sisters I played with." Monica thrust her jaw forward, and then in a quick spasmodic movement, she jerked her head to the left, as though there were a pebble balanced on her chin, and she strove to toss it over her shoulder. "My tic is annoying today," she said. "I don't know why, I'm not sure." She lit a cigarette and then went on. "I talked to Dr. Kettlebaum about my tic and how to overcome it, but he looked at me in surprise and said, 'But, dear lady, it's such an intriguing gesture. Why not leave it the way it is?'" "That Dr. Kettlebaum must have been quite a boy," said Emery. Monica agreed. Dr. Kettlebaum had been a wise and a most useful man, she said, her brown eyes swimming with light. Certainly, he would have instantly understood both her brother's and Reginald's attempts to transform their unconscious violence into something more acceptable to society. The odd thing was that neither of them had become a surgeon, which would have been far more dramatic than reading and writing murder stories. She had considered these matters thoughtfully in the past and had come to the conclusion that the greater the impulse, the greater must be the defense against the impulse if one were to survive as a social animal. She got up to change the angle of the Venetian blind, and Reginald, who had known her all his life, leered horribly and pitched her well-stuffed buttocks. Instantly she went into gales of merriment, her laughter resounding through the apartment. She poured him another cocktail, and when he had taken it, he wound up his facts quickly. Later, the child had been taken to the hospital, but only to die there. The doctors, seeing her condition, asked for an autopsy, and the arsenic was quickly found. Again, Christine put her hands over her ears. She thought, "I'm very vulnerable. I have no strength of character at all." She laughed nervously and said, "Oh, please, please." Reginald laughed at her, patted her shoulder in sympathy, and said that, in his opinion, the case was destined to become one of the classics of its kind. For one thing, there was the thrifty reasoning of Nurse Dennison about payment of the lapse policy, a circumstance which gave the dreadful affair the wholesome, ordinary note it needed. For another, there was one of those unconsciously humorous asides which seemed to distinguish the classic from the lesser crime. For after the autopsy, when her guilt had been established and confessed, Nurse Dennison, in a moment of contrition, said that she regretted the poisoning of her niece far more than she could ever say. She wept and said that she would never have done such a terrible thing either, if she had known in advance that such a little bitty old pinch of arsenic could be found later. At 2:30, when lunch had been eaten, Reginald said that he had to go, and while the women straightened up the kitchen, Emery turned on the radio to get the 3 o'clock news. The commentator spoke briskly of world conditions for a time, then, lowering his voice, he continued gravely, "I have been asked to announce that one of the children of the annual outing of the Fern Grammar School was accidentally drowned in the bay this afternoon. The name of the victim has been withheld until the parents are first notified. More news of the tragic affair is expected momentarily." Mrs. Breedlove and Christine came into the living room at once and stood anxiously beside the radio. "It was not Rhoda," said Mrs. Breedlove in a positive voice. "Rhoda is too self-reliant a child." She put her arm around Christine's waist and continued, "It was somebody more like myself when I was a child. It was some timid, confused child who was afraid of its own shadow, as I was, and had no self-confidence at all. That does not sound like Rhoda." A little later, toward the end of the broadcast, the announcer returned to the local tragedy. He was now authorized to say that the little victim was Claude Daigle, the only child of Mr. and Mrs. Dwight Daigle of 126 Willow Street. He added details to the story. There was an old wharf on the Fern property, a wharf which had not been used for a long time. It was a mystery how the little boy had gotten on the wharf, for the children had been explicitly told not to go there, but apparently he had managed somehow, for his body had been found there. After the routine check at lunchtime had shown him missing, wedged among the old pilings, the discovery had been made by one of the guards who brought the body ashore and applied artificial respiration. One mysterious element of the affair was the fact that there were bruises on the forehead and hands of the boy, but these bruises, it was assumed, were caused by the body washing against the pilings. Christine said, "Poor child, poor little boy." The announcer continued, "Only a few days before, the little Daigle boy had won a gold medal at the closing exercises of the Fern School. He was wearing the medal when he was last seen, but when his body was discovered, the medal was not found. It was thought the medal had become detached in some manner from his shirt, but although the bottom was searched at that place, the medal had not been located." Christine went to her own apartment immediately. She hoped her child had neither seen the boy brought to shore nor had watched the efforts of the guards to revive him. If the child were frightened or upset emotionally, she wanted to be there at the door to comfort her. Rhoda was not a sensitive child. Certainly, she was not an imaginative one. But when the inevitableness of death she felt, if knowledge came too suddenly, without a proper preparation, could make an impression on even the calmest person. But when Rhoda came in at length, she was as placid, as unruffled as she had been that morning. She entered so coolly. She asked for a glass of milk and a peanut butter sandwich with such unconcern that her mother wondered if she fully understood what had happened. She asked the question in her gentle, serene voice, and Rhoda said yes. She knew all about it, in fact. It was she who suggested that the guards look among the pilings. She had been present when the body was taken from the water. She had seen it laid out on the lawn. Christine put her arms around the stoic child and said, "You must try to get those pictures out of your mind. I don't want you to be frightened or bothered at all. These things happen, and we accept them." Rhoda, enduring her mother's embrace, said in a surprised voice that she wasn't disturbed in the least. She had found the discovery exciting, and the efforts at the resuscitation, since she'd never seen such a thing before, had interested her greatly. Christine thought, "She's so cool, so impersonal about things that bother others." It was the thing that she'd never been able to understand. It was the thing she and Kenneth had once smiled about and called the Rhoda reaction between themselves. But this time she felt uneasiness, a depression she could neither define nor fit into any pattern of reality that she knew. Rhoda pulled away from her mother. She went into her room and began working on her jigsaw puzzle. Later, Christine came into the room and put the sandwich and milk on the table. Her face was still puzzled, her brows puckered a little. She said, "Just the same, it was an unfortunate thing to see and remember." She kissed the child on the top of her head and continued, "I understand how you really feel, my darling." Rhoda moved a bit of her puzzle into its proper place on the board. Then, looking up, she said in a surprised voice, "I don't know what you're talking about, Mother. I don't feel any way at all." Christine sighed and went back into the living room. She tried to read, but she could not concentrate. Then Rhoda, as though feeling, if dimly, that she had somehow erred, had done something which, though incomprehensible to her, had strongly displeased her mother, abandoned her puzzle, and approaching the chair where Christine was sitting, she smiled her charming, hesitant smile, her single dimple appearing suddenly. She rubbed her cheek against her mother in a calculated simulation of affection, laughed coquettishly, and moved away. She's done something naughty, thought Christine. Something very naughty indeed to make her go to such trouble to please me. It seemed to her then that her child, as though sensing for the first time that some factor of her body or spirit separated her from those around her, tried to conceal the difference by aping the values of others. But since there was nothing spontaneous in her heart to instruct her, she must instead consider, debate, experiment, and feel her way cautiously through the values and minds of her models. She approached her mother once more, made an eager sound with her mouth, and kissed Christine on the lips, a thing she had not voluntarily done for a long time. Then her eyes narrowed, her head thrown back, as though for a final glance of affection she said, "What will you give me if I give you a basket of kisses?" It was a game the child had sometimes played with her father, and Christine, knowing the rules so well, feeling a rush of both tenderness and pity, took the little girl in her arms and gave the expected answer, "I'll give you a basket of hugs." Later on, when she was bored with her puzzle, Rhoda got out her skates and said she'd like to go to the park. Her mother said she could, and not long afterward, hearing Leroy's scolding, illiterate voice, she went at once to her kitchen window. The man was saying, "How come you go skating and enjoying yourself when your poor little schoolmate is still damp from drowning in the bay? Looks to me like you'd be in the house crying your eyes out. Either that or be in church burning a candle in a blue cup." Rhoda stared at the man, but she did not answer. She moved in the direction of the park and stood there fumbling at the heavy iron gates, but Leroy would not leave her alone. He followed her and said, "Ask me, and I'll say you don't even feel sorry about what happened to that little boy." Rhoda, surprised for a moment out of her perpetual calmness, swung her skates from side to side and said, "Why should I feel sorry? It was Claude Daigle that got drowned, not me." Leroy shook his head, smiled with a wry appreciation, and walked away. It was now close to quitting time, and mechanically he began to do those small chores that were required of him before he left for the day, the child's words echoing in his brain. He swept the courtyard and made sure that the basement door was locked securely, and as he did so, he kept repeating to himself, mimicking the child's voice as best as he could, "Why should I feel sorry? It was Claude Daigle that got drowned, not me." That Rhoda was really something. That little Rhoda didn't care nothing about nobody that lived, not even her good-looking mama. That Rhoda was a mean little girl, if he ever seen one. That little Rhoda was a lot like him in a lot of ways. Nobody could put nothing over on her, and nobody could put nothing over on him either. That was sure. That was something you could bet on. He lived on General Jackson Street, a good 2 miles from where he worked, in an unpainted framed house with his wife Thelma and his 3 gaunt, whining children. The building was on a lot a little lower than the street, and when it rained, water stood undrained in the shallow pool under the house. Against the porch, Thelma had made a flower bed of beer bottles driven into the earth, but the ground was too damp, and there was too much shade from the big sycamore and the flowering althea bush at the end of the porch, and nothing seemed to grow very well. That night, before he had his supper, he sat on the porch with his wife, his feet resting on the rickety railing. At once he began to tell his wife about the death of the Daigle boy, but Thelma slapped at mosquitoes, yawned, and said, "Don't bother to tell me about it. I heard it on the radio." Then, as though his words had reminded her of something, as though silence were a thing she could not endure, she went inside and turned on the radio, selecting one of the dance programs she liked so well. When she returned to the porch, Leroy said, "Jesus Christ, can't you turn that thing down? Can't a man have some quiet even in his own house?" I like it that way, she said. I like to hear music loud. She was a big, dull woman with an empty face of a fat baby, and as she sat again in her rocking chair, she said, "Quit spitting on them petunias. It was hard enough to coax them up as high as they are now. If you got spit, sit it on the steps." He moved to the steps, grumbling a little. Then, as though he'd forgotten for a moment that his present audience was not one he could impress with his tales of injustice, he said, "Pick on me. Pick on me and belittle me like everybody else does. I'm used to it. I can take it. I know I'm nothing but a poor sharecropper." "Listen, Leroy," said Thelma patiently. "Don't try to tell me them lies, because I know better. You never was a sharecropper. You never even lived in the country like I did when I was a girl. Your papa wasn't any sharecropper either. Your papa was a longshoreman, and you know that as well as I do. Your papa made good money doing it too. Nobody went hungry or wanted for anything in your papa's house. It's a pity you didn't turn out like him." "I didn't have a chance," he said. "I didn't have a chance to accomplish nothing. You had chances. You had plenty of chances. You're lazy." She fanned herself, pulling down the yoke of her dress. Then, thrusting her legs against the banister, she went on to berate him for his laziness, his lying, his dirtiness, his unwillingness to play up to people that could help him along, her voice carrying well over the radio. The way he acted, the way he insulted people, was about as silly a way a man could act. No wonder he was always losing his job. For instance, she knew some of the people at the Flora Belle that he was always belittling, and they wasn't no way at all like the way he said they was. That Mrs. Breedlove, for instance, was a real nice, jolly woman, and a kind-hearted one, too. Maybe if you started doing nice things for people instead of griping all the time, maybe if... Then in the middle of a sentence, she quickly, as though bored with her own moral advice, "How about a can of beer before I start supper?" She got the beer and brought it to the porch. It was still not dark, and the children were playing a game in the backyard, a game that seemed to require a great deal of bickering and screaming. Their voices interfered with the music, and Thelma went into the house and turned up the radio a little bit more. "Jesus Christ," said Leroy, draining his beer. "Can't a man get no quietness even at home? If I catch them kids, I'll tan the tar out of them." "You won't catch them, though," said Thelma. "The kids run too fast." It was then that Leroy repeated Rhoda's remark about the death of the Daigle boy, and Thelma, laughing a little, threw her empty can high over the fence and into the street. She got up from the chair, pulled her dress away from her sweating buttocks, and said, "I think that was a real cute thing to say." "That's a real mean little girl," said Leroy. "I never seen a little girl like that one in all my born days." He got out his pipe, lit it, and smoked in silence, thinking how the other children who played in the park, them other ones that wasn't mean, were all afraid of him, just like he wanted them to be. He could make them jump and run out of the park if he barked at them loud enough. He could even make the little girls cry and run off to tell their mamas on him, although he had always gotten out of it so far by being humble and saying it wasn't so, or that the little girl had been acting ugly, like trampling down the flowers or trying to scoop goldfish in the lily pond. But that little Rhoda Penmark he couldn't make no impression on at all, at least not so far. But give him time and he would. Give him a little time and he'd make her jump and run from him like the others. He chuckled in anticipation of that pleasant day, and then defiantly he spat on his wife's flower bed again. Thelma, slapping at mosquitoes with her palmetto fan, said, "Your papa made good money all his life. Your papa was a good provider. That I can say for him, and do so gladly." "That little Rhoda Penmark is a mean little girl," said Leroy out loud. "But one thing you can say for her, and it's this: she don't blab nothing. Anything that happens between me and her." "Listen to me," said Thelma. "You leave that little girl alone. You hear me, Leroy? You're going to get yourself in trouble if you don't quit messing around with those rich folks and their children. I'm telling you, You're going to get yourself in a mess of trouble." "I don't do nothing to her," said Leroy, "except maybe plague her a little and tease her." "I'm telling you, Leroy," said Thelma. "I'm telling you right now." She got up from her chair, called her children, and went into the kitchen to start supper. But Leroy remained on the steps for a time, smoking his pipe and thinking of the little Penmark girl. He would have been surprised to know that, in a sense, he was in love with the little girl, and that his persecution of her, his nagging concern with everything she did, was part of a perverse and frightened courtship. That night after dinner, Christine went to the Daigle home on Willow Street. Her purpose still not clear in her mind. It was not quite dark when she came up the steps. The sky was soft, dark blue, with only the early stars against the horizon. Mr. Daigle answered the bell. He was a larger image of his son. There was the same pale, blue-veined forehead, the same out-thrust jaw and small, puckered underlip. The hand he offered Christine was cold and damp. She gave her name and explained her mission. She wanted to offer her sympathy and to ask if there were anything she could do. And he said in a voice that trembled in spite of himself, "Anyone who knew our son is welcome in this house." Then opening the door wider, he added, "You are the first to call. We are not people who entertain a great deal, and we have not made many friends." The living room had that depressing look of expensive bad taste. There were beads and bows of ribbon everywhere. Everything was wrong, she thought. The furniture, the colors, the paintings. Even the big oriental rug somehow offended. Mr. Daigle said, "You must excuse the looks of the place. We have just returned from the funeral home where they've taken him. Everything is a little disarranged and lacks Mrs. Daigle's touch." Then, standing there beside his visitor in the hall, he said, "You must go in and speak to my wife. Perhaps something you say will, perhaps in some way you can." He knocked on his wife's door, whispering, "Hortense, here's a visitor. It's someone who knew Claude. Her little girl was his classmate and was with him at the picnic." He went away silently, and Mrs. Daigle sat up on the sofa where she had been resting. Her hair was disarranged, her eyes red and swollen, her mind still a little drugged from the sedatives she had been given. She said, "It's not true that Claude was timid and lacked confidence in himself, as some people have said. I'm not saying he was a pushing, aggressive boy, because that wouldn't be true either. What I mean is, he was a sensitive boy, an artistic child, really. I'd like to show you some of the flower drawings he did so beautifully, but I can't bear to look at them again so soon." She broke off and pressed her face into the pillow. Christine sat beside her and took Mrs. Daigle's plump, ringed hand in her own, pressing it in sympathy. "We were so close to each other," Claude's mother said. "He said I was his sweetheart, and he would put his little arms around my neck and tell me every thought he had." She paused, unable to go on, and then said, "I don't see why they couldn't find the medal. I'm sure the men didn't look hard enough. It was the only thing he ever wanted in his life, and he valued it so much." Then, as though the loss of the medal were more terrible to her than the loss of her son, she wept without constraint, her face pale and bloated, her hair falling limply over her eyes. When she would speak again, she continued, "Somebody said the medal must have fallen off his shirt and sunk down into the sand. But as I told my husband, I don't think so. I don't see how the medal could possibly have come off by itself. I pinned the medal on him myself, and the clasp was strong and tight." She wiped her face with a damp towel. And in the silence, Christine said softly, I know so well. The men simply didn't look hard enough, said Mrs. Daigle. They said they looked over and over, but I told them to go back and look again. There was such a wonderful bond between us. We were so close to each other. He said I was his only sweetheart and that he was going to marry me when he grew up. He obeyed me completely. He wouldn't even go to the corner unless he discussed the matter with me and I told him it was all right. He'd want to be buried with his medal. I know that without being told. I want to please him in every way I can. Will you tell the men to please look for the medal again? Chapter. Hi. I decided not to go into the commentary right now because I'd like to get this chapter to you, and I haven't really thought about the questions that I would like to ask. You did answer my question about me making comparisons between the movie and the book, and since most of you have not seen the movie, you would appreciate it if I didn't make any comparisons, and I agree. I'm glad I stopped myself the last time. I am loving the way that this pen looks. It's such an enjoyable pen. That's Diamond Pen Pal. And I found that in this section, this is the third of the fairy dust drills. So you have this beautiful blue, and then you have our favorite ones that I did earlier, which were the chocolate brown. If you watched my live with Rich and Tammy, they were all like, yes, 3371 is our favorite. So that's the chocolate brown one that's in her hair. And this is like a silvery gray. They are, I mean, oh my God, they're just so gorgeous. And I thought it would be nice to do this last clip with that there. I made a jump too. You see that there was the black that were filled in. I took a break to listen to Tammy's live that she did for in memory of for 9/11, and while everyone was speaking, I diamond painted the black drills that are there. This is such an enjoyable canvas. This is another Diamond Art Emporium canvas. It's called People. It's called People. That's it. And it's such an enjoyable canvas. I love this size. I think that it is such a high quality, like almost painterly effect for what size is this? Maybe by 40 by 40 or 45 by 40. I know. Let me see. People 85. That's what it's called. It's a 40 by 40, 80 colors round, and Ren puts that right on the border of the canvas. 85 colors, and I don't know if I can tell along this side here. The side just has the DMC code. It doesn't say like AB on it. That's probably, he also sends along a printed sheet with a picture of the canvas and a printout of the legend because it's kind of small so that you can see it. I had a different project in my head for this canvas, and that's why I was so close to the drills, which I kind of liked. I liked you being able to see really up close how beautiful these drills are. And then you may have seen the camera moving. What I was doing, I was using my cell phone to see if I missed anything. And I did. I missed a few. And I am looking to, well, in the beginning, I was struggling a little bit with the glue dots. That's because I'm getting a little crazy with the glue dots. And I put 4 glue dots inside my pen tip. Okay? Don't do 4. Because the more you put in, the stronger it gets. But it also makes a really loud popping sound, and I know you guys like that pop, 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 pop. And there's some great pops here. I should be quiet for a little bit so that you can hear them. So I used my cell phone. I also wanted to pick up drills with the multi-placer that were the fairy dust, because I have Tracy's DP World putty. I have our Witch putty in my Diamond Art Club 4 placer. And it picks them up and puts them down beautifully with all that coating on them. They did not stick to the putty. So I was making some notes here about, you know, what I wanted to talk about in the previous video that I had in my head, which, you know, didn't happen. But that's the way it goes here at Lisa Marie Designs. And I'm glad that I got out of my funk. And I got out of my funk when I started reading comments from you guys. And you guys helped. You really helped. And I'm so glad that I have you. You are like a little support system here, you know, without even knowing it, whether you comment or you don't. I know you're there, because some of you will email me and say, I know I don't comment on the page, but I'm there. And that's fine. And so it helped a lot. Now tomorrow, what I would like to do is open up my 2 larger canvases that came from Art Dot, and one of them is actually in the mini kit. So I have mini butterfly cat and I have a larger butterfly cat, and I will do a comparison of them together for size. And then the other one is called the Seer, and she is holding a raven. Oh my God, what we throw out into the universe, boy, it comes back, doesn't it? I'm so honored that Art Dot asks me to do these reviews, and, you know, I get a raven. I get a raven. I will not be engaging in these beautiful canvases because I have so many open whips already that I probably will be, especially the raven, I will raffle her off. And I did a raffle. Did I do a raffle? I spun a wheel. What am I talking about? I spun a wheel with my live with Tammy and Rich. So Michelle, who was the winner of a Diamond Art Emporium canvas storytelling, Ren was nice enough to rush that canvas to me because the event was ready to kick off, and my canvas, like most of yours, was going around a carousel inside of a post office in New York, and they didn't care. They didn't care. I mean, I begged and pleaded, and they were like, yeah, when it gets there. So he rushed it to me, and I thought this would be really nice. Can I raffle it off? And he's like, yeah, go ahead, you know. So I did, and Michelle, you were the winner, and so you will be getting that canvas. I went to the post office today, and I sent it out Priority Express for you. It's the little storytelling witches with the cute little ghost in the middle that's kind of like, you know, getting right in between whatever it is that they're talking about. So that's what I have going on for tomorrow. And Saturday, I'd like to do chapter 4. And also my self-care Sunday, because I think what I'm going to be doing is taking a day of rest, and I would like that day to be on a Sunday. And so I'll get my self-care Sunday done early. It'll probably drop, you know, Saturday night, and you can watch it Saturday, or you can watch it Sunday like you normally do on your self-care Sunday. I like self-care Sunday night. It gets me prepared for the week. So that's happening. And then Monday, you guys, Saturday, don't forget to get your week 2 portraits over to the Facebook page, and this is coming to an end. See you next time, guys.